The real problem is this, that we come into at this point. We start from a standpoint of using sense perception and attempting to interpret sense perception as a way of understanding things. Now, at the same time, we are actually looking at it not only with our eyes and so forth, but we're looking at it with our mind at something which says, this is crazy. That sense perception and trying to derive knowledge of the universe from sense perception is stupidity. We have to cure ourselves of that stupidity. Now, how do you do that? Well, you always end up describing an object. The mind tends to describe an object. But then what you do essentially is you end up trying to create an equivalence between the human mind and the animal mind. And you work all these things in, and you try to use approximations based on the idea of ordinary mathematics, of deductive method. But really, you have to look out there. You say, what are you seeing out there? Now, what's the difference between what is seen by an animal and what is seen by a human being? That's the crucial thing here. Because if you cannot prove that a human being is something different than an animal, you have not solved the problem. You haven't even begun to crack it. And a time has come to crack it. Right? Because what are you looking at? And what you're looking at, essentially, is you are looking at the human mind as contrasted with the animal mind. Those are the two objects on which you depend upon to get free of the ordinary mathematical models. And that's what you must free yourself of, the ordinary mathematical models. Because what you are doing, you're trying to equate the mathematical model for an animal's mind and the mathematical model for a human mind. And that doesn't gel. The difference is that mankind discovers physical principles. Now, these physical principles make man independent of sense perception. Because now mankind, instead of trying to rely upon sense perception inside the man is now looking at the contradiction between man and animal, and looking at himself as different between him and an animal. Now, this is what I've been dealing with. This is exactly what I decided time had come to get at in order to break this bind. Well, there's not just a scenario out there. There's not just a plate in your object. That's not what's there. What's there is there's a difference between the behavior of the animal and the mind and the man. The difference is not simply a form of behavior. It's a fundamental difference. The animal responds to nature, to experience, based on a limited apparatus with no real imagination. That is, the animal may imagine things, but it does not create forms that don't exist outside the animal mind. Right. Only man does that. Now, we're now in a period in which the future of mankind depends in a very practical way on understanding these questions I just posed. All along, mankind has been distinguished by what? Mankind is distinguished from all animals by fire. No animal uses fire willfully. Human beings are distinguished by fire. You have a fiery personality, perhaps, but you is fire anyway. So then it goes beyond fire. You find that out of mankind's mind, which uses fire intentionally, and no animal does, the difference between man and beast lies in the principle of fire. Now you're freed of the assumptions, of the usual assumption. You're free of it. Once you say that fire, which is now density of flux and flux energy flux density, which is typical of this. But mankind now operates on that basis. Now look at the plateau. Look at the animal mind. Look at it geometrically, for example. All you see is the animal behavior. You do not see any creativity whatsoever beyond animal behavior. You see animals reacting in behavior as animals. They don't create fire. Animals shun fire. They're afraid of fire. Mankind depends on fire. And we have various kinds of fire. There are different expressions of fire. They go all the way up. And so now that you find that where the animal mind has a predetermined mind, in a sense, based on that animal characteristic, the human being is freed, if they wish to be. They're freed of the animal instinct, and they start with fire. Now, the problem is that we're in a society which is generally an animal society, in which you have a ruling class, an oligarchy, which rules over people. The people are treated as members of an animal farm. And they do not actually think in terms of fire. Fire and its implication is not a practical thing for them. And therefore, when we think in this creative way, obviously, as you see the case of these two guys, Planck and Köhler, the two, and Einstein included, these geniuses are geniuses because they didn't believe in sense perception. They didn't believe in being practical, which is for them is being stupid. What drives them, what drives the creative mind, is the sense that if he just sticks to being normal, he's stupid. We don't want to be stupid. We're not going to submit to being stupid. We are going on to the next discovery. And we're going to identify ourselves not with the discovery, but the process of continuing the process of discovery. And I declare that today, I'm convinced we now have enough knowledge tucked into us that we can take that as a policy and push everything from henceforth on the basis of that policy. Because when I wrote this thing yesterday, day before yesterday, that's exactly what I decided to do, was to put forth a thesis which would actually cover this objective. Because the time for mankind has come to realize this objective and to kick some butt which will uplift people above sense perception. The kick that makes you human, that lifts you above sense perception. And leave sense perception to senseless people who need it.
Yeah, that does get right at the heart of everything we're confronting with our operations in Washington, D.C. right now, around the fight for Glass-Steagall, credit system, NWAPA. Because what you've had with the monetarist system is you've had, through the shaping of the culture over the last 40 years, and things like behaviorist economics, all of this has been to convince people, one, that you are just an animal. Once you accept that idea that, like an animal, all you have to do is move and think according to various impulses, the pleasure-pain principle. Then it becomes, well, how do I get pleasure? How do I avoid pain? Well, that all becomes, it's a question of money. More money, more pleasure, less money, more pain. And once you get people trapped in that kind of a situation, now by controlling the money system and determining what has value and what should be desired and what's fashionable and all these kinds of things, you're effectively controlling the whole population as an animal population. And they lose total connection to what were the principles that even created the possibility to, have a cell phone, have a computer, have electricity. They just become these objects that you access with money or are denied access to because of lack of money. And you take on the condition like any point in the evolutionary process, right? Though evolution has been governed from almost bound by a principle of creative development, at any one moment, none of the elements of the biosphere, none of the animals of the biosphere are aware of what that principle of creativity is. They just operate according to the system as it exists, and they're sort of in that pleasure-pain struggle for existence relative to that system. Likewise, that's what's happened to man. We've gotten this far because a very small number of people have been creative and have been able to communicate those ideas through industry, through technology. So man has advanced up to the current level. But for the most part, all the people in that system are operating relative to the system as animals, with no real knowledge of how it ever even got there. And now that's reaching a point where, like with any animal system, once you sort of put the brakes on the creative process, things become entropic. You start consuming your fixed base of resources. You get diminishing rates of returns on your technology. And the thing really starts to implode, as we're now seeing.
Well, what I've come to is recognize that I am now self-qualified to commit myself to exactly what I've said today. It's something I've known for a long time, but the idea of imposing it as a policy on society in an active form, with all the implications of what I'm doing clear in my own mind. And this is the only chance that mankind has, is to free ourselves from these old habits and go into the new. And what we have out there is we have very rarely surviving individuals who have survived enough to this process of degradation to be able to imagine this, and also at the same time use their imagination to create some things of this type. They now have to be, we have to now encourage them to see themselves in the matter that I have portrayed them today. And if mankind sees himself, or at least some people, see themselves in this role and understand what the scientific creativity is, what artistic creativity is, freedom from all this crap, we can fight to save humanity. And we can anticipate with confidence that mankind will be able to go through things like the steps of thermonuclear fusion, matter-antimatter processes and beyond, that mankind can solve these problems and look at these challenges not simply as terrible things that threaten us, but look at these as challenges we must meet. And the time has come to shift everything to that level, because nothing else is going to do a damn bit of good.
Okay. Yeah, you have to be seeking new kinds of fires. And it would be like the situation today, I was thinking if you look back to around the time of the introduction of the steam engine, and if like to try to imagine if mankind had just stayed using horses, it seems crazy. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you move forward and do these other things? But today, it's the exact same kind of thing, where it's like there's really like, there's all these problems we could solve, but we don't really need to, or there's not any money for it, or it's just no actual intention to make that what the human species is about. To make that's the point of life.
That's exactly the pitiful thing. Can you imagine mankind condemning this human species to death, which is what they're doing, by enforcing that kind of policy? What the Queen of England is proposing is the death of the human species. And she and her crowd are guilty of exactly that intention. They may not see the implications. They may not wish to see the implications. But that's exactly what they're saying. And the time has come, we've got to break through on this thing. We can no longer tolerate submitting to this crap. Mankind has to understand what mankind is, and understand on that basis what man can be. And what I just presented is simply a summary of that point. It's very clear. We all know the facts. It's getting the guts to put the facts forward and basing oneself on them, and pushing other people to accept those realities. And that the thermonuclear fusion, matter-antimatter, are things which demonstrate that if mankind can, as we know, deal with thermonuclear fusion, which is already settled, and a settled question in terms of its capability, then why should mankind kiss butt? Mankind is a superior species and has a superior destiny in the universe. Let's get at it. Have some fun.
Let's.
Agreed.